Hello, everybody. Welcome to another podcast. Today all my guests are good. I was going to say I have a great guest. I always have great guests. This is Rahul. You probably know him from YouTube. What's your YouTube channel again?
Just my name, Rahul Pandey.
Right. So I started watching his videos because I got an actual job, like a year and a half ago at Square. And he talks about career growth. Generally just like navigating the tech space during your career. And I had no reason to watch his videos before because I didn't have a job. But when I got a job, I started looking for advice, career advice, how to climb the ladder, how to improve, anything about your career in tech. So his videos are great. I cannot recommend them enough. There's almost nobody on YouTube doing videos like these. There's Steve Wynn or you, basically. Those are the only two people that I've seen who are like, you hit all the right points, I think, anyway. Maybe just give a intro, and I think I've kind of introduced you already, but I would give whatever else that I missed that you want to say. And I'd like to start talking about your career when you actually were working as a software engineer and like what that looked like.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that was a great intro. I've been working as an engineer here in the Bay Area for about 12 years now. And I think that, I actually started out on YouTube doing exactly what you were doing, which is basically tutorials about Android or Kotlin. But then as I did more and more of those, we were actually talking about this off camera, those are a ton of work. And I feel like the thing is, there's a lot of people who do a great job with the tutorials, right? And so I thought more about it. It's like, where can I offer a unique perspective that is not as common on YouTube or Twitter or LinkedIn? And that was kind of where I felt, hey, I've been working as a staff engineer, a tech lead, a manager at companies like Pinterest or Meta. And I think there's not enough depth of discussion about, things like performance review or career growth or working with a manager. And it turns out, in my opinion, that those become more and more important the higher up you go. In fact, more important than coding. And so I thought, hey, this is how I can actually have more impact on the world and actually even turn it into a business, which we can get into that later. But that was kind of how I got started on this idea of career growth content.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about your business later. I want to start talking about it now. I'm so tempted, but I'm going to stop myself because we'll talk about it later. I mean, I've also had these like internal discussions because I've made, I don't even know, thousands of videos. I think there's like 600 on YouTube. I got hundreds on Pluralsight, hundreds on my website. And it's really like, it's so much work. Nobody realizes how much work it takes to build a course or even just a single video. Like, it takes so much time because it has to be perfect when you're teaching somebody something. I totally get it. And I also get what you just said about there's already lots of people who are doing this and they do a great job. I'm like personally struggling with this right now as I'm like working full time and I'm making videos. And every time I think about making a video, I'm like, oh, well, this other guy did something that was almost like it. Do I really need to make a video? And it's not like it's like, yeah, because I'm trying to like increase the overall knowledge base of something and also do things that I'm interested, obviously. But and then it just gets it's discouraging to be like, oh, I'll make a video, but there's already one that's almost like it. It's kind of like you get to this, like, what is the point sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think the other perspective here is that, when you talk about building a new platform, a new product, what you often hear if you're trying to build a company around it is you can't just be 10% better. You can't be 20% better. You have to be significantly better. It has to be obvious to someone like, wow, this new product, this new platform is meaningfully going to help me in my career or with whatever the objective of that product is. And I feel like with an Android tutorial, yeah, I could bust my butt. And like you said, it takes like 10, 20, 30 hours to make a really high quality video sometimes. But it'll probably end up being like 10% better than what's on YouTube already, right? And I'll be proud of that and I'll learn a lot in that process. So there's definitely still a lot of value. But in terms of actually impacting other people at scale, I do think that there's kind of a limit unless you're on that content treadmill with tutorials.
Yeah, I totally get it. So your career, like, well, I'm interested in like the specifics of your career. Like, how many years did you spend at what place, and even like what was your first job, and what are some of the things that you remember about like the difficulties in getting the job, and maybe the difficulties in once you got the job and navigating the sort of the corporate space, I guess.
Cool. Yeah. So let me give you kind of the 2-minute TLDR of the past 13 years or so, and then I'll try and highlight some of the more interesting things that we can dive into later. But went to Stanford, and I think I had never really written a line of code prior to coming up to California. I grew up in Michigan, and so immediately I was surrounded by these people who were so good at computers and programming. I remember in the neighboring dorm my freshman year, there was a guy who was the youngest he was the youngest certified Java programmer in the world. Like he got his, like, I don't even know, I've never done a certificate, but he got like a Java Oracle certificate at age 10 years and 9 months. And he had a Wikipedia article about him. And so I was just like thrown into this environment where like that was what you do, right? You're just like 2009, 2010, Stanford. And so I just kind of went into it. I failed pretty much every single interview I did for an internship, my freshman year, my sophomore year, even my third year. And then finally, once I got to my fourth, and I stayed at Stanford for 5 years because I did a undergrad and master's degree. But finally, in that fifth year, I started to feel, hey, I can do this. I am noticing patterns with the questions I'm getting in interviews. I feel like I actually have some programming ability now. I can build something a bit sophisticated. And I made a video about this on YouTube, but I ended up getting 5 offers in my last year. I was about to join Google, but actually I ended up turning down Google because a professor of mine started a company. I was doing research in a lab. So I did that. That was my first job. So for about 8 months after graduation in 2014, I was at this recommendation system startup that got acquired by Pinterest. And so in 2015, I joined Pinterest. I was there. That's where I transitioned into Android development. And then after 2.5 years, I joined Facebook, now known as Meta. And then from 2017 until 2022, I was there, and I left Meta to start Taro last year.
Cool. That's so cool that you took a risk and it actually paid off. Like as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, oh, that was a bad choice. But then, it got acquired, and boom, there you go.
I can't complain about what happened. I'm really fortunate to have it all work out in the end. I'm really happy with what I'm doing now. I'm glad to have my career. But I think you are right. Like purely from a financial perspective, I probably would have ended up doing better by going to Google compared to the startup, because like not all acquisitions are created equal. You already know this, right? But like what happened with us was an acqui-hire. So they threw out the product, they threw out all the work we had done, and said, hey, we just want to hire you effectively as a new grad into Pinterest. They give me a little bit of a better compensation package than a normal new grad, but it really didn't end up being that much more compensation wise compared to Google.
Right. So yeah, that definitely was not the right choice then. And then well, I shouldn't say definitely, but probably not. And then there's also like, if you work at Google, it's like you get an accolade attached to your name, So like if you had done that, you probably could have it would have been much easier to get any other job afterwards, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I tell people all the time when they talk to me about careers, is that unless you have this really robust network of people behind you that you can just leverage, and you have something like a Stanford name brand or something, there's so much value in having a Google or a Meta or a Microsoft on your resume, because then even if you only work there for 1 or 2 years, it'll just open up a huge amount of opportunities later on in your career. So I mean, I think there's a huge amount of value there.
Yeah, well, I mean, even it's a very practical flag, I think, because it's like it's very easy for a recruiter just to look and say, hey, oh, he worked at Google. It's like an instant, he's at least sort of competent, check mark.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember like when you were in school and you said you failed a bunch of interviews? Maybe you talked about this in that video that you mentioned. Do you remember like landmarks, I guess you would say, as you started getting better and better that made you like gain more confidence?
Yeah, I feel like the thing is, the first couple of years that I was failing these interviews, literally the only reason I got better is because I failed so much that there was no choice but to like really understand. I like saw the same problems over and over again because I was failing so much. There was no real framework or smarts behind how I was approaching it. It's not just like a numbers game. I think it was only until like my fifth year, we call it the co-term year. It was only in my co-term year that I really started to say, hey, I can do this in a more methodical way where I can meaningfully increase the passing percentage I get if I'm a bit more deliberate about how I prepare. And so that was, I think, the turning point. But for the first couple of years, it was like I was just like walking into every interview not blind, but like without too much real framework thinking, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally like that's how most things in software goes too. Like it's very much a try it and screw up a whole bunch of times and
Yeah.
then figure out the right pathway to take, really.
And I think actually, I mean, to be clear, like that is exactly what you should be doing for things that are low stakes. Like, you know, me and you, we're like Android devs. What I tell people is that if you're trying to be a mobile developer, any kind of developer, the cost of building an app and publishing it is so low. In some cases, entirely free. Just go off and screw up, make a bunch of mistakes, and go wild, right? And so that's actually the right methodology or the right mentality, in my opinion, for most of software. Yeah, when you're doing interview prep, that's where like if you really want to get a big tech job, you have to be a bit more, you know, deliberate about how you're approaching, because then you know there's an outcome that you want, and there's someone judging you.
So then, what do you think? Like now, you know, what would you tell yourself looking back at Rahul in his 5th year? What would you tell yourself about like how to prepare for the, let's say, the technical portion of the interview?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that if I could go back in time, I would definitely have revisited my preparation strategy. I mean, the first thing is just like a mental shift, which is that when you get the answer, you're practicing, right? You have this like algorithm or data structure problem. You get the answer. The learning starts when you find out the answer. The learning doesn't end. I think so many people have this mentality like I'm struggling for 10 minutes, I can't figure it out, I look at the answer, I move on to the next problem. That's completely the wrong way of approaching it, in my opinion. Once you reveal the answer or you understand it, now you go back and like literally 2 or 3 minutes later, redo the problem. Can you regurgitate it? That's like a very basic level of understanding. If you can't do that, you clearly haven't retained the answer. You haven't understood the problem properly. And another approach is, like my mentality back then was, okay, I didn't get the solution after 10 minutes. Let me go read I didn't get the problem or I didn't get the solution. Let me go read the whole thing after 5 or 10 minutes. What I do now is I try to enjoy the struggle. And what I mean is like, I'll go to the solution and reveal it one line at a time. Like literally, I'll like make it as painful as possible by looking at one line at a time and slowly exposing it until, okay, now I got that hint or I got that like insight that lets me solve the problem. But there's so much of an emphasis, I think, for people just like rush to the solution that they don't properly enjoy the discomfort that comes with the struggle. But I think that's really where you get the maximum learning.
Yeah, so I'm terrible at data structure and algorithm style problems. I've spent some time. I've probably spent, if you were to total it up in my entire life, I've probably spent maybe a month, like 8 hours a day, you know, like practicing them. And, you know, I definitely noticed significant improvement towards the end. Like the beginning, it was so terrible and so difficult. It was like, I didn't even see the question in the question, really. And it was like, yeah, like I wouldn't get anywhere. And then, especially with like the easy ones were like they usually spell it out for you. And then the medium ones, they like spell out less for you. And then the hard ones is like, they almost spell out nothing. And then there's a trick, probably. So that's kind of how the hierarchy goes that I found anyway. And yeah, it kind of got fun towards the end. It was like, okay, in my head, I'm like, okay, first job, figure out what this thing is actually asking me, because that's like, if it's not an easy one, that's usually the first sort of thing that you got to figure out. Yeah. And then if you can't get it, I don't know if I did the line by line thing, but I think I probably did a similar thing. It's like slowly, try to only give yourself enough so that you could realize the answer yourself. And then that gives you that, like, makes it more concrete in your head, I find.
Yeah. And I think like, I'm not sure if you're similar, but like for me, I'm very like task oriented, like completion oriented. And so back then in college, I would actually have like, I'm going to do 10 leak code problems today. And I was so stubborn that I need to complete 10. I think I actually hurt myself in the process. Because like, you know, you have to spend time getting to like what you said, the core insight or the core problem within the problem. And so because I was so focused on I needed to get 10 done, I didn't have enough time to actually dig into each one. So I think probably what would have been smarter is to like say, don't do 10, but like properly do 5 or like whatever the number might be, depending on your skill level. But like, that would have really served me a lot better longer term if I had just slowed down a little bit and understood the solution and problem a lot more.
Yeah, it's like focus on the principles rather than like just like basically memorizing, because that like if you're like, hey, I want to do 10, then you're almost saying that I want to memorize 10, as opposed to like really like understanding the steps, the problem solving steps, so that you could, like, the principles, so that you could solve any problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you feel good in the moment. Like you deluded yourself into thinking, wow, I made progress. I did
Yeah.
10 things. But like
Yeah.
in actuality, you
Check.
didn't really do much. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you so I mean, leak code questions are sort of like mandatory, like today anyway, in a lot of companies. Like there's pretty much no way around them. What do you think about that? Do you think there's a better way to do it? Or like, how would you do it if you were hired? Well, you do hire people because you have your company. So like, what do you do when you're hiring engineers?
So right now we literally are a team of 3, and the one person that we did hire is someone who was in my freshman dorm. So I've known him for 13 years. So it was like a very atypical.
Okay.
There wasn't really an interview because we had literally worked together on like 4 or 5 projects throughout the past 10 years. But okay, so I think this is a really like important question, and the answer depends, I think, on the company and the goals of that company, right? So in the ideal world, I think the best way to evaluate an engineer is to actually give them something which is representative of what they would do on the job, right? So like if I were to hire another employee at Taro, then I would say, okay, can I fly you in to the Bay Area, and can we just pair program for like 8 hours? Can we like work on something together? Like, let me just, in your environment, in your setup, I want to see how you operate, how we talk through problems together. I think that really is like such a good way, not only in terms of evaluating technical ability, but also importantly, cultural fit or ability to like walk through things and communicate, right? Which is so important. The issue is that Google and Meta, they're trying to hire, well, I don't know about now because of all the layoffs, but like historically, these big companies have been trying to hire literally thousands of people every year. So they can't afford to fly out 1,000 people and spend 8-10 hours on like a pair programming session in the way that I would think is ideal. And so that's why they basically revert to these really crude mechanisms to evaluate you, which is like, hey, in 45 minutes, here are 2 coding questions which are honestly completely contrived. You would never actually do those on the job. But that's like at least some signal that they get about your communication, about your problem solving, about your algorithmic understanding. And there's some correlation between that and your performance as an engineer. So in my head, the short answer is like, yeah, everyone should just do the more like, let's pair program and figure out how you work together. But because some companies can't afford to do that, they don't want to spend that much time, they do these other kind of more crude mechanisms.
Yeah, it sucks, but it really, like, practically speaking, I mean, I get it. You know, there's definitely, like, I know at some companies will give you a take-home project option, which is awesome. Like Square did a take-home project option because I think it's very unlikely that I would have passed a data structure and algorithm style. I mean, maybe if it was like not a hard one, but if it was a hard one, there's like no, because it's like it's a very, interviews are very pressured. It's a very high pressure environment.
Totally.
And then if you're given a difficult problem, and then there's maybe a trick in the problem, it's like, yeah, good luck with that while you're under pressure, you know.
Yeah.
But people do it, so I don't know.
I mean, I do remember, I mean, this is a long time ago, at Square, your company, I actually did the I actually really enjoyed it. In 2013, I interviewed at Square, like as I was graduating, and they were really good in the sense that they only had like one algorithmic question, but the majority of the interview was just pair program with someone, which I really enjoyed. So I mean, I do think that your company's actually, I don't know if they still do that, but like at least back then it was pretty good.
Yeah, they do a take-home style. So like if you get to the point where you're gonna do like the face-to-face interview, you work on the take-home project that you initially did when you submitted your application, and they'll be like, okay, you built this thing, now we want to add this feature to it, and then 2 people or 1 person watches you, and then you add to that feature, which is I think it's very reasonable. It's clear that you know what you're doing, or you don't know what you're doing, which is, you know, and it's like platform specific. So like if you're working on Android, it'll be an Android project. You know, if you're working, I don't know if they do it for all the other jobs at Square, but I know they do it for Android. But yeah, I think it's like generally a good interview process.
Yeah, I mean, I like those just so much more practical, right? Compared to what you would get, like these brain teasers effectively that you get at some other companies.
So typically it goes like you have a technical part, you have a behavioral part, and you have a system design part. Yeah. That's like typically the 3 that you get. What would you say about the behavioral? Like, what if you, so assume if people right now who are watching don't even know what that means. So could you tell me, like, what is the behavioral section about? And then like, what are things you could do to potentially prepare for that?
Yeah, the way I think about most big tech interviews is they have the leak code style, like the algorithm, you have the behavioral, and then you have the system design. In my experience, typically the behavioral part is actually fairly minimal compared to the other two. But they usually ask about things like, tell me about a conflict you had with a coworker and how you resolved it. Or like, tell me about a technical disagreement you had and what you did in order to resolve that technical tension. What I would do, which I think actually worked out pretty well, is I would basically have a spreadsheet where I would have 3 or 4 stories lined up. And these stories, like I put a lot of thought into them, and they were general enough that I could basically navigate any question into one of these stories. So like if you told me anything like, okay, tell me about a technical issue or tell me about a leadership challenge you had, I would basically pick one of those 3 and regurgitate that one and modify it according to your prompt. And that way, like no matter what you said, I always had an eloquent answer, an eloquent story with a situation, an action I did, and a result, an outcome. I could kind of say it pretty cleanly no matter what the behavioral prompt was.
That's a good idea. I think a lot of people I think that's common advice, and the problem that people say, that I've heard people say, is like, yeah, but then it's not real. It's not like a real thing, but it is real because it was a story. And from the interviewer's perspective, like I've done interviews, and I don't care. I don't care if it's like a like they've written this out ahead of time. I just like, it's better for me because the interview goes more smoothly. You're not just rambling around and I'm like trying to find the thing in there that you're saying, and you can't really. It's definitely the right way to do it.
Yeah, I think the thing with a lot of these interviews is that the skill of a good interviewee, like the person being interviewed, is that you have to be able to navigate the discussion to something which is interesting in terms of trade-offs, or like there's some debate, right? So like I've done a couple of behavioral interviews where like the person tells me a story like, there was a decision of whether we should lie about something or not. Like, okay, obviously the answer is don't lie about whatever you're doing, right? But like that's not that interesting, right? So I would much rather hear a story where there's some nuance of like, okay, we had a trade-off between quality and time. And that's like a pretty common thing in engineering. Like, tell me how you resolve that. What did you do? How did you approach the people involved? Like that's like the thing that I think requires some thinking, and that's why sometimes just saying things on the fly may not pan out. Yeah,
it's almost like virtue signaling. Like, well, I was given the opportunity where I could lie or not lie.
Yeah.
And I chose I chose not to lie.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the end of my story. Yeah. What about the system design one? What's that all about? What are the interviewers looking for, and what things would you say could potentially help you prepare for that?
The system design, I feel like, is mostly an exercise actually in communication rather than actually your technical ability. And the reason I say that is because like the whole point is effectively to what we just talked about, actually, to navigate the discussion to something where there's some nuance or something interesting about a decision you could make, right? So the most common mistake I see with system design is like, hey, design this, like, the classic example like Twitter, or like some feed or like some feature within the Twitter app or Instagram, whatever it might be. And people just start talking. And the correct way of doing it, in my opinion, is the first 10 or 20 minutes should actually be just information gathering, understanding the requirements, understanding the data model. It should be a conversation. And if you're talking for more than, 4 or 5 minutes without pausing or giving the interviewer a chance to provide feedback, you're doing it wrong. And so I think the number one biggest thing is like, it has to be a conversation. You should be asking a ton of questions. And the second thing is, you don't have to necessarily have a strong opinion or like here's what we should do. It should be more like, hey, depending on these assumptions that we're making, like X, Y, Z, this is a good option. If you tell me this other thing, here's A, B, C we should do instead. So being able to figure out what are those assumptions that could change, that's, I think, how you get points on the system design.
I remember my system design interview at Square. I think that was the one that went the worst. I think I just rambled. Oh, it was actually at Square. It's slightly different. It's a past experience / architecture discussion. But it's sort of under the umbrella of system design.
I mean, I do think that system design is so hard because, like, the fact of the matter is that if you haven't worked at a big enough company, like you've worked at an indie project, like with Taro, right? Like, we're still fairly small. The fact of the matter is there's actually not that much interesting system design debates we've had. Like, we don't have huge amounts of data, right? And so I think that it is a bit, like, it's hard to build experience with system design. The only real way, I think, is talking to more experienced people or reading blogs from companies like Square or Pinterest or Google or whatever to understand what are the difficult decisions they're making.
Yeah, in my interview, I pretty much just rambled about architecture for like 45 minutes, and I didn't even have any diagrams. I think I like scribbled some things on the screen, and was like, okay, if I'm building an app, like this is the way I'd architect it, and this would be like the data flow, and I'd use this for the cache and this for the network, and this is how I'd unit test it. So I think it was like fine, but I just remember specifically how I felt at the end. It was like, oh, the time's up. Wow, I just rambled for like 45 minutes, and I don't think it went well, but I did get hired, so
it worked out. I think the other thing that's also interesting about system design is that making effective use of a whiteboard or like the Zoom equivalent of a whiteboard is so important. Like there have been a couple times like where I just talk to you, right, and like we're having a conversation, and then I actually go into the interview, and I don't know what to do with the whiteboard, and it's like what you said. Like I ended up talking for the whole time. I like draw a person figure on the whiteboard. But like that's it, right? So like I feel like having some practice of actually using a diagram and like figuring out common terminology that you could use there, I think also goes a long way in showing your competency.
I think even preparing diagrams ahead of time, like, if you're going to do it for the behavioral one, why wouldn't you do it for the systems design one?
Absolutely.
Like if they're going to ask you, like at Square specifically, if it's going to be a past experience / architecture and you're applying for an Android job, like you generally know what is going to be asked, and you generally know how you're going to answer. So like you could prepare diagrams ahead of time, and that would make it better for you and the interviewer, I'm sure.
Totally, yeah. I mean, system design is actually a very ripe area for prior preparation because like, especially if you're like in one domain like mobile, the total enumeration of all the interesting trade-offs that you could have is actually not that much. Like there's maybe, 10, 20 that you could like really talk about and say, hey, come in with some ideas of where those might be.
So then now let's navigate down the line. Assume someone has got a job like myself. I got a job about 1.5 years ago. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that you would have at said job. And specifically, I had a lot of problems because I had never had a job, and technically it was fine. Like technically competent, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I was used to coding all day, or planning my courses, doing what I wanted, how I wanted it. And now there's like all these new things like Jira I had never used. Even reviewing PRs, I had never really reviewed PRs. There was like a larger than I would have thought learning curve with that. And what else is there? Reviewing designs. So like reviewing other engineers' designs, and then even writing designs. So all of those things, like I really struggled with. I think it took me probably 3 months before I felt like I was sort of productive there, which I think is a long time. So anybody who gets a job and you think after a month you're not productive and things are going terribly, it took me 3. So keep that in mind. Yeah, I guess let's talk about like writing designs, because that one was one that I had like to intentionally, thoughtfully work to get better at. What sort of things would you say to someone like me if I was coming up to you and asking, hey, Rahul, my designs suck, help me?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've encountered from people who are coming into a bigger environment, like a big tech company or even a medium-sized tech company, is that I think they dramatically underestimate the amount of time they need to spend building up trust and context. And I think if you don't have the trust with people on your team and you don't have the context, you're effectively dead in the water. Like you just can't build, or you can't write an effective design document without having those as a prerequisite.
Like, hold on, what do you mean by you said building like connections with people?
Yeah.
Like your team.
Yeah, like, okay, so let me tell you the failure mode, maybe to illustrate. Like what some people will do is, hey, like there's this we're gonna add a widget or a feature into the Cash app or whatever app you're working on. And okay, here's like how I would do it if I was building on my own. I'm going to write 2 or 3 pages. I'm going to talk about the MVI architecture or the MVC architecture, whatever you want to pick. You have some nice diagrams and you put it out there for review. 9 times out of 10, or I would say like 95% of the time, that will completely get demolished in design review and like feedback from your peers, because this new engineer didn't do the legwork to understand the context. And so what I mean by that is like whenever a new feature is ideated on, or like someone proposes a new feature or a new widget, there's a lot of reasoning behind that, right? And so like what has been tried in the past? There's at a big company, there's almost for sure been like 2 or 3 variations of this that have been tried and failed in the past. So understand why. And then like embed that context in the introduction of your design document. Say, hey, here's why it didn't work, either for technical reasons or non-technical reasons. Talk to the people who are involved. There's a really good chance that the tech lead on your team or the manager on your team was aware of previous like debates or discussion about that. Talk to them and say, hey, like, I'm really trying to make this design document address all the questions that you might have. Like, let me know what you think. So like before you even put out for review, you should understand what are the hot spots. Like going back again to that discussion of behavioral and system design, what are the interesting trade-offs that you have to make? And you probably don't have that if you're a new person coming to the team. Like you have to understand what are those trade-offs by talking to the manager, the tech lead, the other people who have been involved in related features, right? And so only once you have that, then I think you can say, hey, now I can sit down and actually put this together in like a 4 or 5 page design document.
That's funny. I actually one of the designs that I wrote recently was a rebuild of something. It was like, this thing doesn't work properly and we need to redesign it and basically rebuild it. And yeah, it was like a lot of the doc was like, this is because there were so many edge cases. It was a labyrinth of edge cases. And so it was like, I made a totally separate doc for like, you do this happens. You do this happens. And then I wrote out a doc that was like the current state of you do this happens, fail. You do this happens, fail. And then I had another section where it was like, this is what it should look like. You click this happens, success. Because it was just like a labyrinth, like I said. Yeah. So you wrote it and then wrote an intro that was like, hey, this thing is broken. It's been broken since this point in time. Here's what it looks like today. And then there's like table of failure cases. And then there's like, here's what it should like, table of success cases. So there's like all of that. Anyway, that turned out good. Okay, so we're back. Rahul's camera overheated. Time to upgrade. Okay, what were we talking about? Designs, right. So something I wanted to say was I actually almost joined Taro, by the way. I almost joined like, I don't know, 4 months ago, maybe something like that. Because I was listening to your videos, and I still watch your videos, and I watch Steve Huyn's videos. They're both very good. Because I'm trying to get promoted, and I went through the previous cycle. I didn't get promoted. I'm in the process of going through it right now for the next one. And so I was trying to prepare for this one, and basically my last review cycle was like, everything's great, but you need to write more designs, pretty much. Because I had only written like 0.5 of a real design or something like that. So I was like, okay, this is like, fuck everything else. I need to get like the highest quality designs you've ever seen. I need to get these out. So I almost joined because I wanted to some advice to get better. But I ended up talking to Steve Huyn. It could have been you, the one who gave me advice, but you didn't, maybe you didn't respond to my tweet or my message, or I don't know, something happened. Anyway, Steve responded right away, and he's like, hey, yeah, let's chat. I'm like, sick. And so he gave me some like really good advice. I just want to tell you what he told me, which like worked out beautifully. He said to write basically like drafts of your design, and try to ask friends or higher level engineers who are on your team or just like at the company, and get them to review it and be like extremely critical. Like tell them to like tear this thing apart. Like I give me any and all advice that you can. And that was like so helpful, unbelievably helpful. I got, I think 3 like high level engineers to look at my designs, and they gave me like the most valuable feedback. I feel like I skipped like 3 years of like design writing practice that it would have taken me to reach this level in like 2 months, because they were just, it was so methodical. And there was back and forth like, oh, maybe change to write this, or like elaborate more on this, or this is pointless, don't say this, that kind of stuff. And then so by the time I actually wrote my real designs, they were like very tightly written designs, no wasted language. Diagrams also, that was one piece of really good feedback that I got from somebody. He's like a diagram fiend. He like his designs have like beautiful diagrams. He hates when he sees code in designs. He's like, don't write code, use a design, like, or use a flow chart, use something. Because like when people are reviewing them, they don't want to read your code, especially if they don't have the context of like being working on your immediate team on the things that you work on. Like they want to be able to just be like, look at your logic flow and see like, do these things make sense, as opposed to like, here's what the implementation or the abstraction will look like. Here's what the implementation will look like. They don't want to look at that. They want to see like general, like, I don't know. What do you think of that advice? Do you think that was good advice?
I think that's great. One of the best engineers I worked with when I was at Facebook was like a L8, L9, I think. And what was so odd about him is that routinely while he was working, not even for the context of a design document, he would literally open up OmniGraffle, which is like the diagramming tool that we used, and he would make OmniGraffle like diagram charts for his own benefit, just to like better visualize. Then he would turn that into an artifact which he would then post about and get feedback on. And so not only I think did it honestly help him in just like structured thinking, but also like had this really weird effect where people just like when you put diagrams out in the world, people just somehow trust you. It's like, wow, okay, this person's thought this through.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was like, I think a big part of why he had so much influence across the org is like, he was just like, it didn't feel like a heavy lift for him to like quickly summarize the flow or the diagram of some system in the way that for me, I was like, okay, I have to like, somehow it just feels like I have to do tons of work in order to create a good diagram. So I think it's good advice if you can get into the habit of creating those.
Yeah. Something you just said, it's like, when someone writes diagrams, they have instant credibility. That's totally true. When I see like any kind of like a nice diagram or even a sort of nice diagram, I'm like, oh, he put in time.
Yeah.
He's thought about this. He didn't just like lazily write some code in the Google Doc and like shove it out to people. Like but like really doesn't take that much more time. Yeah. But it, for some reason, it has like a vastly different effect.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's probably one of the highest leverage things that you could do as an engineer. Just like learn a good diagramming tool, whether Excalidraw or OmniGraffle or whatever you pick, even like Google Slides, honestly. But if you can just churn out diagrams, the marketing value of that alone is pretty enormous.
Yeah, true. We use Lucid Charts, by the way. That's what I use. I don't know if it's like a square wide thing, but that's what I use anyway, and they're pretty good.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was managers. So I think I've been blessed at Square because it's my first job. I feel so lucky, but also I don't have a lot of context, so maybe I'm not that lucky. I don't know. And I feel like I have the best manager who has ever existed. He's just like so empathetic. He runs a tight ship. He seems like he truly cares about you, and that feels very good as an employee. So I've just told you some of the things that I think make him a great manager. What do you think makes a great manager, and like what things would you tell people to look for in identifying a like high quality manager?
I mean, I think what you said is pretty spot on. I think the number one attribute for a good manager, at least at the frontline level, like someone who's actually managing ICs or individual contributors, is they have to care about people. In fact, I remember when I was at Facebook, you had this thing called boot camp, right? Because you go through this process and you talk to different teams to evaluate which team you want to join. A really senior engineer told me that I want you to go to talk to these different teams in boot camp and ask the manager, why did you become a manager? And if their number one instant reaction or the instant response isn't, I care about people, or some version of that, like I care about helping people grow, I love being empathetic and understanding people. If their answer is not that, then you should not join that team. Like that's the only correct answer, is like they should care about people. I think that so many managers get into it because they think they have more influence on the org. They can
money too.
Yeah, like they have their fiefdom, right? And they keep kind of growing their little fiefdom of like 5 engineers, 10 engineers, and so on. And I think to be fair, like I think that's actually kind of true. Like it is, in my opinion, a bit easier to climb the ranks as a manager because you just kind of are able to get by with context and reputation more than technical brilliance on the IC track. But like you have to be clear, like what kind of manager are you getting? That's like one thing. Just do they care about people? The other thing is there is some element of can they get things done? So do they have credibility within the org that they can advocate for you and your projects? And when like I don't know how it works at Square, but like most companies I've worked at have a calibration. We're like, okay, Mitch, you have this packet of like all your work. I have to go into calibration and defend you now. So, hey, here's why Mitch deserves to get promoted or get the rating he wants. I think that requires some level of awareness on, hey, here are the different projects in the org. Here's how important they are. Here's why my report or my team has really meaningful projects. So a bit of, I would say, politics, But as much as you can evaluate that as a new person, I think those are both super important.
Yeah, I think because like for me, like I don't need the job. Like I could not work there, and I feel like if you had a terrible manager, I would that would be a good way. Like it would make your life miserable, you know? Like
Yeah.
we're having like a coworker that you don't get along with is one thing. Like that's like, you know, that's manageable. Having a manager that you don't get along with or doesn't support you or something, like that's like you're switching teams or you're leaving the company,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to make your life enjoyable as I see if your manager is not advocating for you or giving you feedback. And I think actually one hack there is that some companies will actually have, and most companies will have some sort of regular check-in. At Facebook, it was called Pulse, right? So every 6 months, you would take this kind of Pulse survey where you would evaluate, hey, how do you feel about the company? How do you feel about your manager? How do you feel about your director? And
Yeah, we do that too.
yeah, so like a really good way of evaluating a manager is like, hey, can you share with me your previous Pulse scores? Like you can actually be that direct.
True. Yeah.
Or you know, sometimes they have a policy like I can't share that or whatever. But then you can just talk to other people on the team and just understand like how do you like working with this manager? What do you think they could improve on? Like phrasing the question as like what do you dislike? Those often will get you more actionable answers compared to like, okay, do you like him or not? Those aren't going to help you that much.
Right. Like if you're thinking about switching to another team or whatever, like those are actually definitely things you should do.
Yeah.
Like you talk to the manager of the team you're looking to switch to, being like, hey, show me your pulse scores. I never thought of that. That's genius, actually. And yeah, just like talking to the other people on the team and just being like, hey, like what are, you know, off the record, like what are the things that you like, or if you want to tell me the things that you dislike, but most people will probably be hesitant to say those things, but
yeah,
you never know.
I mean, so in general, I think like this is like a framework that I live by. There's like two ways to make a decision, right? One is first principles thinking, which is like, I'm going to talk to the manager and like make a judgment on my own about whether I like him or her. There's another approach to which is second principles, which is like, let me talk to people they've interacted with and get their feedback. So I'm not doing a direct evaluation, but it's like a second degree, right? And I actually think that those turn out to be more valuable. Like I actually think the same thing for companies. Like I never look at the financial statement of a company when I'm thinking about joining them. I'm like, let me look at the quality of people who are joining that company as a proxy for how good that company is or how financially good that company will be in the future, right? And so I think in general, doing the second degree evaluation ends up being pretty, in some cases, better than, you know, first principles evaluation.
Yeah, that's actually what I did. Like when I applied for jobs, I applied to 2 jobs. When I applied for jobs, I applied at a bank and I applied at Square. Let's not talk about the bank. It's not important.
Yeah.
The reason I applied was like it's not important. So anyway, think I only applied to 1 job, and that's basically what I did. That's the reason why I applied, is because I looked at the people who worked there,
Yeah.
who are like some of the most impactful Android engineers in the industry,
Yep.
who are working there. And I knew some people who worked there, and I talked to them, and I just said like, hey, what's it like to work there? And tried to gauge and nobody ever said anything bad. It was like all so positive. So that's basically why I was like, okay, well, why would I go anywhere else?
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying I could go work anywhere else. I'm just saying like, this seems like a great place. Like,
Yeah.
why
I mean, I
wouldn't
think
work there?
as an Android developer, you can't really beat, I mean, Square is just so famous for the
Yeah.
quality of the open source projects and the quality of developers. I feel like, yeah, you can't go wrong.
Okay, let's change gears here a little bit. So I do want to talk. We have a bit of time. Okay, we're gonna go a little bit over, but we're only because your camera overheated. I guess I want to talk about 2 more things. I want to talk about Taro, and I want to talk about a estimating work. So we'll start with estimating, and then we'll finish talking about Taro. That'll be a good segue to finish up, and then you can tell us all about it. At Square, they recently. Oh, that was so when earlier I said when I went through the promotion cycle last time, my only feedback was designs. That's not true. My other piece of feedback was you need to. We don't see a lot of mentorship. You got to participate in mentorship more. So Square actually, I don't know if they've done this before, but they did it in the last couple months. They have this mentorship mentee program.
Nice.
And so I joined it as a mentor, and you get matched up with somebody who signed up as a mentee. And that was really great. And one of the things that me and my mentee would talk about in our weekly meetings was estimating. He was struggling with estimating work. He was always, or not always, but like often missing his targets. And yeah, it was like a spiral. It was like a spiraling effect because he'd miss a target, and then the next thing he'd miss the target by more because he missed the other one, and it was just a bad situation. What sort of advice would you give on like giving the best estimates possible, and also pushing back on your manager? Like if your manager says, hey, can you do this thing? We think it will take you a week, but like in your head, you go through the thought process of estimating it roughly, and you're thinking, wow, there's no way this is going to take less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like how do you handle those types of situations?
Yeah. Okay. So first thing I'll say is the oft repeated advice of like in software, especially, whatever your estimate is, double it and report that number, right? Like it's like things always go wrong in software. So you have to kind of accommodate that. I think more tactically, or maybe perhaps more helpfully, I think that it's really valuable. Two things. One is I think doing reflection on why did the deadline slip in the past 2 or 3 occurrences, and use that as ammunition the next time it happens, right? So if your manager is saying, hey, I want you to get this done by next week because I think that's how long it should take, say, hey, actually, based on the past 2 or 3 times, like it turns out this other team takes a long time to review code, or the QA team, there's like an overnight lag, like delay there, or I have to first validate the API can do this, and then I can commit to that date, right? So like figure out what are the patterns through which you've gotten delayed in the past, and use that as a way to push back, or at least ask for more clarity or like more time. So that's like one big tip. And the other thing is one tactic I like to use a lot if there is a lot of ambiguity is a date for a date. And what that means is I feel like so many engineers have this tendency to rush in and say, hey, yeah, I think it'll be done in like 8 weeks, 2 months, right? And they kind of just rush to give you an estimate. If there is a meaningful amount of ambiguity in the project, a much better system is to say, hey, I actually can't give you a date right now. Can we circle back in a week? And in a week's time, I'll be able to give you a much more precise date with different milestones lined up as well. And so I think then you can actually use that week to actually de-risk the project a lot more. Like figure out what are the moving pieces, what are the places where things might get delayed, who do you need to talk to get their buy-in, right? Because if you're like relying on another team for code review and they have no way they have a deadline to meet, they'll take their own sweet time, right? So like in that 1 week, the date for a date, you can de-risk all that. And then when you come back the following week, you can be way more confident and exact in, okay, this is when we'll get it done, and I'm pretty confident in that. So I think that's something that I think people don't need to rush into giving a date for.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'll try and remember what I told them. Because I'm great at hitting my deadlines. Nice. I didn't even realize this, like, because when I first started this program, I had no expectation. I didn't really know what to expect. And then he started asking me questions like this one, and I thought, am I qualified to answer that? And then I thought about it, and I'm like, oh wait, yeah, I guess I am, because I don't miss my deadlines. And then I'm like, okay, so what am I doing right? Like that, and I had to, like, I'm on video with him, like going through this internal discussion with myself, and I'm like, hold on a sec, I probably have something good to tell you because I don't miss mine. So let me like go and try and reverse engineer what I do. And what I ended up telling him, or something along these lines, was like, I try and like estimate something in like the best case scenario. Like I assume I go through like every implementation, or like roughly the implementation details, and I try to be like, okay, in the best case scenario, if everything goes my way, there is 0 problems, tests are written, everything's great, this is how much time it will take. And then I go back through it, and I go through the like sort of rough outline that I had just created, and I'll look at point 1. And I'll be like, is there any ambiguity in point 1? What could go wrong in point 1? Yeah. And then I think, okay, and then I think of the worst case scenario for point 1. And then I add an estimate for the worst case scenario. I go to point 2 and I say, same thing. Is there any ambiguity here? What could go wrong here? Add an estimate for everything going wrong. And then I keep going through it like that. And then I think probably at the end of the day, you end up with an estimate that is double the time of what your best case scenario would be. And then that's usually what I go with. And another thing that I want to say is that in software, it's usually okay to estimate way too high. It's very, very bad if you estimate way too low. So like you should always try and be on the top end of that scale. You know, like don't try to hit it perfect, because even hitting it perfect, like for one thing, you're not going to hit it perfect. But even if you hit it perfect, that's still not great. If you estimating a little high is kind of like where you want to be. But then if you take a look at the extremes, like suppose you estimate way too high, supposing you estimate way too low. Estimating way too low is like catastrophic. That's terrible. But estimating way too high is like, probably still fine.
Yeah.
So like that's how I think of it anyway.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that I feel like sometimes there's an emphasis on like, how do I estimate well? But actually sometimes the more important thing is, hey, things will get delayed. Things will slip. How you handle that delay is important. Because like surprises, like a delay is okay. A surprise delay is not okay, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, yeah, I mean, definitely the skill of estimation is important. Everyone should develop that. But I think equally as important, perhaps more important, is that things inevitably will get delayed no matter how hard you try to make a good estimate. Then how do you communicate that? How do you talk about what are you doing to remedy the situation? How do you provide a new estimate? Those are also equally important communication skills that kind of go hand in hand with this idea of estimation. Right.
So it's like ongoing communication as the situation evolves, sort of thing.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, if you have like a 3-month project, you have a certain set of assumptions or information at the starting point. 1 month in, you might actually have different priorities, different estimates, different team priorities, right? So like you have to anticipate that things will evolve, even if you are doing the best you can in terms of like technically everything is going well. Like you have to be able to communicate and keep up to date with all the things that might still screw you over, which are not just
like
things.
some random thing is happening in QA right now. Okay, is this gonna like affect our launch or whatever?
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many things, especially at a big company like Square or like especially Meta. Like there's literally a random engineer on a random infra team like in London could roll out an experiment which then somehow screws you over, right? So you have to kind of defend against all of those different things that could hurt you.
Okay, last topic, and then we're gonna shut her down because I wanted to only do an hour. Tell me about Taro. And I'm actually personally very curious because like I said, I almost joined and I might end up joining. I don't know. Like right now, like I said, I got advice from Steve Quinn, and I think, and that advice I think gave me enough action items. Like the only reason I didn't join is because I was like, okay, well actually Steve gave me a lot of stuff I should work on. I don't think I could necessarily take action even if I did get more advice right now. So I, didn't go looking for it, but yeah. Anyway, tell me about it. I'm curious.
I mean, so I should first comment. It's like the lighting over here is so bad right now. It's like the worst angle of the sun and everything. But okay. So regardless of that, so I think, the idea with Taro is I think you're actually a really good data point for like why we created Taro. Is that there's so many engineers who are really good at coding or like really good at just developing applications. Like you've developed literally hundreds of videos, dozens of apps. So there's no doubt that you know how to code. You know how to code quickly. You know how to code with high quality. But it turns out, and you've been living this firsthand, is that there's so much more to being an effective engineer, a good senior engineer, staff engineer, principal engineer. There's way more to that job than just writing good code. And I think that what I've seen again and again, both in my own life as I got into a big tech role and also when mentoring and managing people, is that people aren't aware of that delta of like, hey, you know how to code. There's a lot more that goes into the job beyond coding. And so Taro is basically, how can we, at scale, help literally millions of engineers try and overcome that bridge or that barrier of the technical skill and the engineering part. And so the reason I think it's powerful is because it's very context dependent, right? Like me and you have a certain experience with like big tech and working in Silicon Valley companies, but there's so much kind of nuance behind that, right? Like the advice I would give you as a junior engineer working at a Series A startup is going to be very different compared to if you were a senior engineer working at Google in New York, or if you were a woman working in London, right? Like these things actually do matter. And so I feel like the idea with Taro is, can we create a really high credibility place of all these types of engineers who can share really tactical, credible advice about things like performance review or picking a good manager or writing a good design document, things that you don't actually get taught in school. And that's the goal. I think we're off to a good start. We have hundreds of engineers who are paying us and thousands of engineers who are visiting us every single day. But I think a lot more work to be done. And I think it's something that can really impact the whole engineering field if we do it well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see a demand for it. Like personally, like I said, I was going to join, like no question, because the difference of a promotion or a not promotion in tech is a huge amount of money.
Yep.
So like I think I looked in your website and it was like $50. It was under $100 a month or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So like.
And I think, I think the other thing is like, so two things. One is ROI. If you can actually figure out how to grow your career even 6 months faster, like get a promotion 6 months faster, I feel like it's like the ROI is obvious, right? So that's like one thing I feel good about.
Oh yeah,
like
so
we can
obvious.
Financially make it worth it, and also just make people feel more confident in their job, which is in some ways priceless, right? Like you just feel you come into your work and you feel good about what you're doing. You feel like you're in control as opposed to like being reactive all the time. And the other thing that I think is so important is this idea of awareness, which is like, hey, I'm like a L4 engineer at Google. I just came in. Sometimes I think the issue is that the L4 engineer, if I like hop on a 1 hour call with them, they don't even know what question to ask me, right? Like there's an idea of what are other L4 engineers at Google asking that I could then benefit from, right? And so that's the other power of Taro is that because we're trying to make this all async and we have a really robust Q&A forum with everything tagged by level and company, you can actually very easily go in and say, hey, I'm a level 4 engineer in Google in New York. What are the types of questions that these people are asking? And I feel like if we can create that database of questions based on these different parameters, I feel like a lot of the challenge of mentorship can be solved. And so that's kind of what I'm really excited about.
True. Yeah. My next question was going to be, how do you scale this to like millions of people, but the forum thing separated by location, your context basically.
Yeah, exactly. It
would be a good way to do it. Yeah, like you could be like, I'm an L4 working at Google. I want to get promoted to L5, and you could even like, I'm sure there definitely would be people on there who would say, hey, who are an L5 now. They were on Taro when they were L4.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a clear path, a documented path of what they were asking, what they improved at, and like the outcome, and then the outcome is promotion, obviously. So that sounds like that would be effective.
Yeah, and actually we did toy with this model of like, hey, can we create a mentorship matching platform? We're like, hey, you tell me who you are, and I'll try and find someone who can talk to you for half an hour. There are two issues with that, right? Number one is that it's operationally super intensive to try and find these people who are available at the same time to talk for half an hour or an hour. And the thing with mentorship is that it typically requires a recurring interaction. Like you can't just like magically solve all your problems in half an hour. It requires a pattern of talking and understanding how things change. And so this async format is really powerful. And the other thing is that, in the past 3 years, I think you're full-time remote. Is that right?
Yeah.
So like you've been full-time remote, and so you don't have as much IRL interaction. You can just like go grab someone in the hallway. And I think for people like me who I loved going to the office, I love that free food and all the drinks and all the like interaction. I don't have that anymore. And so I do feel like as much as we can reduce the activation energy of getting really high quality tactical feedback from your peers or people at surrounding companies, I think that just makes your mental health better and also makes you more effective at your job. And so I think the COVID pandemic has really kind of, in my head, increased the urgency for this kind of product to exist.
Yeah, it seems like it's needed for sure. From my perspective, it seems like you solve a problem. ROI is obvious, like for tech jobs. There's no question that if you could get something that actually speeds up the rate that you progress, even for 6 months, like you said, is like it's like many thousands of dollars that it's totally worth it for like a couple $100 or whatever. I don't know anything about the product, about your products. I haven't tried it, but it sounds great. It sounds like I may join. I don't know.
Yeah,
it depends. I guess if I get stuck, really, that's the question.
I will. I'll send you some good links maybe after the call. But I would love to have you. And I think that like it's a combination of Q&A, which is like you can actually interact with different people on the forum. We also have like really vetted videos from like people who have been in Meta, Microsoft, Amazon. Like they've actually been living in these roles for 10, 20 years. And so we try and really make it like a high quality kind of curated set of people and videos and content that can move the needle. And so if that's what you're looking for, then I think Taro is a good place.
So do you pay these people who are, high level engineers at these big companies?
So historically what we've done is like kind of a collaboration model. So for example, like the Daniel Tomko is the last person who joined, and he made like a onboarding series. So if you're a new engineer at a company, here's like the best way to onboard. Here's how you like build up context. Here's how you talk to people. Here's what you should do. He works at a company called Formation. And so we actually have a partnership with them. And so that's kind of the model that we've been doing to get these really high quality people on. As we scale, I think we definitely are open to figuring out other incentive models, whether that means money or discounts or other perks that we could give people. But I think we're a bit early for that.
What do you mean by partner with them? What does that mean?
So Formation is a fellowship program where they basically do interview prep. And so it's a very nice compliment because we're deliberately not focused on, hey, here's how you grind leak code. We're focused on, hey, once you have the job, we're going to support you with onboarding and promotion and feeling confident and picking a good team, right? And so the idea is that, hey, he has like a ton of experience at Microsoft and Meta. He made content for us, and then we refer people back to Formation. So that's kind of there's many different ways you could have a partnership, but that's how we're doing it with Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, affiliate link sounds like an obvious one to me.
Yeah, you will be on the top of my list. When we have an affiliate model, I'd love to include you in that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what everybody does. Everybody does affiliate links. It's like the most obvious, and there's tons of YouTubers who I'm sure would jump on that train. So yeah. I don't know. That one seems like a for sure go-to. Yeah, so that's it. We've gone over, but not much over, mainly because of your dead camera. So that's okay.
I take the blame for it. I need to upgrade my camera.
But it's been fun. It's been nice to get to know you. Product sounds great. Had some good advice. We talked about a lot of things, which I'll put timestamps down below about the topics that we talked about for everybody listening. And I'll put Rahul's contact. I'll put his Twitter, his website, jointaro.com, I think it is.
That's right. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks, Rahul.
I was going to say, I feel like I remember you've been in the Android YouTubing game for longer than I have. And so when I started my channel in 2019, I remember watching yours and Florian, Coding and Flow. Those are the two people I was like, wow, these people, if I could talk to them or if I like could make content like they make, that was my goal. And so like, it's cool that, more than 3 years later, we're able to hop on and chat. So it's just super fun.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. That's one great perk about YouTube is I get to talk with basically whoever I want. Anybody who has something that they want to say or sell will definitely do a podcast with me.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty excellent perk.
That's the benefit of being an influencer. So you have that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Anything else or?
Nope. That's super fun. Thanks for having me. And yeah, would definitely love to keep chatting about career growth. If you have any questions or if you or your audience has questions, I mean, I'm open to connecting on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever platform people prefer.
All right. Tweet them, people. Twitter's down below. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. Bye, everyone. See you.
Bye.